Welcome to the Half Geek, Half Human podcast, where we explore the intersections of technology, business, and life. This podcast is powered by Atiba, a custom software and IT services company in Nashville, Tennessee. Now to your hosts, Anna Kate Ross and Joey Baggett.
Hi, everybody. Today we're joined by Dr. Donita Brown. After more than 20 years of corporate management experience leading teams of 2 to 102, Dr. Donita Brown now serves as professor of management at Lipscomb University's College of Business in Nashville. She's an author, a speaker, and a habit coach. She also hosts a podcast called The Management Minute with Dr. Donita Brown. On the show today, we'll speak with Dr. Brown about the evolution of the podcast, what she's learned along the way, and what's next up on her management education lesson plan. So, Donita, so nice to see you today. Thanks for joining us.
You know, it's great to be here today. And it's so interesting to hear myself called Dr. Donita Brown. I hear Dr. Brown in class. And of course, the management minute is Dr. Donita Brown, but that doctor is still kind of new. I just finished in December. So when I hear it, I think, is that me? Oh, yeah,
there you go.
That really is me.
You know, you've got it. You might as well use it.
That's right. That's right.
So today we're so glad to have you. You have such an interesting career. You've talked to so many people just through your own corporate experience and through your education background and also through the podcast. And so we just, the podcast that you've launched, I believe you launched it earlier this year. Is that right?
Yeah, in February.
Okay, in February. And about how many episodes do you have now, do you think?
We have 3 seasons. I've recorded 40, we've done 40 interviews, and we've released I think we just released our 28th episode. I could be wrong. With 1 or 2. But yeah, we release them weekly. So Management Minute with Dr. Donita Brown. It's 15 minutes or less every week. The same 3 questions are asked each week. And we really have found that that's a good time period for those that are listening. And so we're targeting new and probably middle managers to listen to the podcast. And typically new and middle managers don't have a lot of time to listen. So we have found that a short podcast of 15 minutes really works for them.
Yeah, I love that. And we wanted to talk specifically about the podcast today because obviously we have an interest in podcasts since we're doing what we're doing here. But also I love how kind of so much of your career experience kind of seems wrapped up with a bow with this podcast, kind of paying it back to some of the younger managers starting out, but also just with the student component. So where did the initial idea for the podcast come from?
So a couple of years ago on Giving Day, Davis Brown, who is a professor here, no relation to me, he's a marketing professor, said, we need to have a content creation studio. And a couple of the professors were like, what is that? I'm not a marketer. Content, what is all this? But as we know, content is king in business. And what we heard from businesses was that content creation was a business skill. We had businesses that were looking for students that could create great content, whether it be a management major or a marketing major. They just needed to be able to do that. But we also had students that had needs for like headshots, like how to have a real professional headshot, not a headshot of somebody who had cropped out, a date, in their LinkedIn profile. You can see the kind of weirdness. And then a place that they could use for like a quiet space for a video interview. So we kind of had this multidimensional need. And so on Giving Day, Davis said, I really think we should use this as our reason for why our alumni board should give. And we have a very strong alumni board in the College of Business here at Lipscomb University, and they fully funded the content creation studio. So we took a space in the Swing building and converted it. And it is now our content creation studio. I'm not there today because it's actually being used, which is a great thing. But it's really nice. It's a multifunctional space. So it's headshots, it's video presentations, it's you can do videos for products. You can do podcasts like I do. So after we got it finished, we thought, okay, we'll ask a few professors to create podcasts and kind of go first and use the space first and really be experts in the space. And so I had raised my hand and said, I'll do it. I have an idea. I had actually had an idea for the Management Minute, but it was going to be twice a week. I was going to interview somebody one time a week, and then the second part was going to be sort of a topical interview. We recorded 2 of the topical things, and they were terrible. Like I listened to them back, and I thought, nobody really wants to hear me talk for 15 minutes about whatever. My first one was on teleworking. Is it going to come back or is it not? And I just thought, this is so boring. But I had already recorded 3 or 4 guests of the 3 interview structure, and it was really interesting. Like it just seemed like it was so interesting. So we decided, instead of releasing twice a week, we would just release once a week, and we would do interviews. And what we found was it's really kind of fun, and it's fun asking the same questions every week. We're in our 3rd season now. Maybe in season 5 we'll change them. Maybe we'll get bored with the questions, but so far we have a variety of answers. There's some common themes in those questions and answers, but I think it's really good. Our guests bring their personal wisdom each time, and so I always learn something new. And even when I listen to them later, I think, wow, I'm glad I got to listen to that again, because it was even different from when I had remembered in the interview.
Yeah, they are a bit addictive. I mean, I was listening to several of them to prepare for this, but also I found myself like, well, let's listen to the next one. Let's check this one out. I mean, they're digestible and easy. And will you tell our listeners what the 3 questions are? I know we're going to talk some about that at the end, but what are the 3 questions you ask your guests?
Yes. So the first one is, how do your values impact your management philosophy? That is the first one. The second one is, who or what has shaped your management? And then the third is, and I'm paraphrasing. And then the third is, what book has impacted you the most? And I'm a bookie. I read like 60 books a year. I love books. And so that's my personal question. Like, let me see what books you're reading. And it never fails. I always get great recommendation for books that I haven't read, and some that are confirmation of like, yes, that is absolutely a great book to read. But, it's interesting on the who or what has shaped your management. What I love about that is sometimes we get stories about failures. One person that came to the podcast, Tom Harmon, talked about, and hasn't been published yet, he talked about being selected for a new job and told he needed to go take this other job because he was going to get fired from the one that he was in. And it was really an interesting, like, what he learned from that. And that was great. Some people talk about, other failure type things. Others talk about how their parents have influenced them and had them become a different, they think their management has been really influenced by their parents. And, other people talk about key events in their life. So all the questions are really kind of interesting and lead to great discussions, as I'm sure they do for your podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the storytelling component of any podcast or anything you're listening to is always the most interesting piece, just learning from other people. Ours is a bit more freeform. It's the intersection of business and technology and life. So we kind of tend to go in a lot of different directions, but that's my favorite part of this podcast also, is just hearing from our guests and what their personal stories are and kind of some of the, the experience they've had that they could share with our listeners. So maybe with that, Joey, why don't we get into some of the things that Donita has learned just from her podcast? We had 4 different topics that we were going to run through today: effective communication, team motivation and morale, the book recommendations, some specific ones, and then adaptive leadership. Let's jump into that.
Yeah. So on the effective communication piece, because this is one that I've learned a lot from a lot of different people, and I'm sure your 20 years in the corporate world lend a lot to that, communication. And I'm sure you've made mistakes along the way, and particularly the I know there's some uncomfortable conversations that sometimes you have to have. So tell me, I guess, what you've learned, and if you could tie it into those 20 years of experience, like what you learned along the way, and maybe throw in a mistake or two you made along the way. So, because maybe you'll make a lot of us feel better, but it's just that's such a crazy topic to get into. And I've read one of my favorite books actually is called Crucial Conversations. And it teaches you a lot, but not just in the business world. And so it's kind of helped me communicate in my relationship with my wife, with my kids, and just in my family. So tell me a little bit about that in your history.
Yeah, I will say, for effective communication, one of the things that has been confirming for me, or maybe affirming, is that effective communication takes a lot of time, and you have to be very purposeful in how you communicate. You can't just think as a manager or as a leader, I'm going to communicate this out one time and it's going to be fine. Like everybody's going to hear this and it's going to be just fine. That is just not what happens. And so many of my guests talk about listening as part of effective communication. I think one of the failures I have had as a leader, and I see it even as being a professor and communicating out assignment information, is that I might say something and think that everybody's hearing me, but I actually have to do a really good job of listening and being purposeful and creating ways that I can listen to my students, or when I was working in corporate America, listening to my coworkers and those that were on my team. And it just doesn't happen by accident. You have to be very purposeful. You have to schedule the time. You have to make sure you're doing it. And I think in the world that we live in today, with it being a hybrid environment, we're obviously not sitting in the same room. It also changes the way that we have to communicate. When I see you and I can see your body language, I can communicate in one way. But if almost all of our communication is asynchronous or via some other media, I have to make sure that my intent is heard and that I understand what your intent is. So I think it's all about being very purposeful and maybe even slowing down a little bit to make sure that we're listening. Most people listen with the intent to respond and not with the intent to understand. And I see in my own personal management journey that I often listened with the intent to respond, not with the intent to really, truly understand. And people want to be heard. I think that if an employee feels heard, they'll feel safer doing their job and they'll do a better job.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I love that you said purposeful communication. And one thing that I've learned from trying to practice different types of communication is it really does take practice and a lot of trial and error. One of my probably most challenging communication times here recently is trying to coach my son's 10U soccer team, and trying to communicate with those children is one of the most challenging things, because I swear I will ask them for their eyes and ears, and within 2 seconds, their eyes are over there, they're over there, they're waving their hands in my face. And so that's a whole different world of effective communication. And it's one that I have not figured out quite yet. But it takes a lot of practice to just communicate with coworkers, because everybody is so different. And I was a big culprit of that, listening with the intent to respond. Like I had something I wanted to say. And so I was just waiting for that person to finish and then say what I needed to say, but I didn't hear what that person said. So that's taken a lot from me as well, just as a very extroverted, outgoing person to get it down. But no, great points.
Well, and you said something that I think is so important. You said as an extroverted person, because extroverts process verbally. Like that's how we process communication, and it's how we think. Introverts do not do that. They do not have to speak to be thinking. And I think that, being an extrovert as well, I have to be mindful that not everybody is like me. And probably earlier in my career, I just thought everybody was like me. And so they should just think like me and talk like me and communicate like me. And I worked for 20 years in healthcare IT. And so not working in healthcare IT, I found I worked with a lot of introverts. And once I realized that I love to do things that my technical engineers did not like to do, then we were a match made in heaven. But when I thought they should all be like me and worked like me, it was very challenging. I remember I did had some training conducted for a team of highly skilled network engineers. So I think network engineers are like the smartest people on the planet. They are just so smart. And it was my absolute favorite team to work with. And it was about a team of, 14 or 15 at the time.
We have a network team here, side note, and I couldn't agree more. They're such great guys. Yes,
they are great, but
yeah. They're just my favorite. Okay. We did this training, and it puts you in personality types by colors, and blue was all the people, and green was analytical, and yellow was all about structure, and orange was about, being really big. Well, there were no oranges from our team. None of us were there. I was the only people person sitting at the blue table. There was a couple that were sitting at this yellow table that were all about, schedules and checklists, and almost everybody else was at the green table. And I remember thinking, okay, this is really interesting. Like, nobody's sitting with me. I am so different. And here I am. I was the director of their team. And the person that was conducting the training said, okay, let's write down everything that frustrates you. And the first thing that was written was everything that Donita does before 8 o'clock in the morning. And I went, oh no, oh no. And they further went on to say, like, I come in the mornings and they all would get there super early. I'd come in and I would be high-fiving, hey, good morning, like walking down the hall. And I loved it that all their cubicles were like this galleyway before I got to my office. And I was like, stopping and saying, how was your morning? How was your night? Wanting to know all about it. And I probably had some pretty low social awareness at the time, because I'll tell you what happened. When they said everything that Donita does before 8 o'clock, they didn't like that. They came in early so they could start working before I got there, because I always wanted to talk. So the next morning I came in after this training and I didn't speak to one of them. Like, I just tunnel vision, walked, went to my office, shut my door. And about, 10 o'clock, opened my door because somebody had knocked on the door. And they said, hey, how are you doing? Did you have a good night? And I thought, oh, this is really kind of nice. And it turned out, once I realized they needed their space, it was great. But it completely changed my communication style with my engineers. And I later learned we don't all communicate the same way. And I tell that story in my Principles of Management class, which we call Leading and Managing People here at Lipscomb University, to show that we're not all alike. We all need to be communicated with in different ways.
That's a really beautiful story. I like hearing that. It's easy to forget that, not everyone is exactly like you are. I know I've been in that position too. But this is a great segue into some of the things that you've learned in your career and through the podcast about team motivation and morale. What are some of your insights from your experience about just motivating a team in general?
Yeah, I have found that motivation typically falls in a couple of different categories. And motivating a team isn't hard work, but it isn't one-time work. Like, you can't just say, okay, I'm going to motivate my people today and then think you got it and it's all going to be done. You have to really figure out what motivates each person. And people are motivated by different things. Some people might be motivated by accomplishing a task. Or they might be motivated by saying, I'm going to get recognized for something. Or they could be motivated by the fact that they're given an assignment and they're given the flexibility and freedom to do it however they want to do it. Gen Zs are motivated by purpose. They're not motivated by money. So some of that has to do with generational differences. And then other people are motivated because they get to work with great people. So it's a social connection. So there's some categories that I've learned people are motivated by. And I guess one of my favorite things that has come out of what I have learned through the podcast and teaching management, and then just my own management experience, is that followership is really important. And I actually teach followership in my classes and teach it for workshops for other companies that are thinking about leadership in a different way. You have to have created great followers before you can really think about leadership. And all that kind of ties into motivation.
I was going to ask you to define followership, but I understand what you mean now. But does the leader define the style of followership, or do the followers come to it organically?
Oh, the followers come to it organically. There's actually 5 types of followers. There's the alienated, and you've probably all worked with that type of person. That's the person that should have quit and left, but they quit and stayed. They're around and might be earning a paycheck, but they're like, I'm not doing that. They're the ones that just aren't going to do it. There's the a follower that just kind of is a conformist, the one that, will do almost whatever you say. There's the effective, which is what you want, which they're going to do what you say, but they might challenge you a little bit, and that's what you want. You don't want somebody that's just going to be like, whatever you say, I'm just going to do it. You want the follower that's going to be engaged and say, okay, I like your idea here, but have you thought about it in this way? I also have a passive follower who's kind of the quit but stay, but maybe they still do some good work. And then you have the survivor, which is a little bit of all of them, the pragmatic follower. There's a great TED Talk by Derek Savers. It's an early one, so it's not one of the like super polished one where he talks about the lone nut. But that podcast is a great one. I usually show it in my class to talk about followership. It's
I love that.
Yeah, it's a really great one.
We'll pull the link to that and put it in the show notes too.
That'd be great.
Share with others too. But okay, that's great.
So one thing in some of the stuff I've read and looked at, it talks about and then this is not in our pre-show notes or anything, so sorry to spring it on you, but it talks about the importance of like one-on-one communication and one-on-one meetings. So I'm sure you have, experience both in the corporate environment, like with your IT team, the network engineers, but I'm sure you also have like your office hours, for your students to come in and get that one-on-one time. So can you talk a little bit about that and about how it can be important and motivating, but maybe the lack of it and what someone would experience from not participating in one-on-ones?
Oh, yeah. So I'll talk about it first in the team environment, and I'll talk a little bit about in the classroom because I had an aha moment yesterday. I guess my philosophy with my employees when I was managing and had large teams was a little bit different. I would try to spend the majority of my time with the high performers. Typically, as a manager, you would spend your time with the people that were, having a hard time, or and you should at certain points. But I really felt like we should spend most of our time as managers with those that you want to see grow. And it was a little counter intuitive, I would say, because I had typically spent my time with those people that needed more help, not that I thought wanted to see grow. And I'm probably not explaining that real well. In the classroom, I try to do the same. But here was my aha that I had yesterday. I thought I've got to create a way, because oftentimes the students that are doing pretty good are the ones that come by from office hours. They want to see me. They're not embarrassed to see me. It's the ones that maybe are struggling, but they don't either know they're struggling. They think they're doing okay work. Maybe they've missed a couple of classes, and maybe their social awareness is kind of low to think, maybe I don't need this. Or, maybe they're first-gen college students and they don't know that they have a right to come and talk to the professor. Nobody has told them, you should go talk to your professor if you're having a hard time. So I was talking in the classroom yesterday, and I was talking about making it easy to get feedback. And as I was saying this, I was telling a story about a time that I was working in IT and we were rolling out a new product, and the project for the new product was not going well. Of course, we know, having worked in IT, that all projects go perfect, right? I mean, that's exactly the way they go. We can all laugh about that. They don't always go perfect. But this project, from the IT standpoint, was going okay. From the business standpoint, it was not going very well. The IT people really thought everything was going great. And from a technical standpoint, it was. Our CIO of the company said, "How are you getting your feedback from your end users?" And somebody that was very technically minded said, "Well, we've created a form, and if there's any problems, they fill out this form." And he said, "Okay, so you're asking very busy people to fill out a form." Said, "That is terrible." Like that. And I remember him pushing back like, "You are just ridiculous. Are you really thinking you're going to get any good feedback by asking people to send you a form?" He said, "You need to get up out of your seat. You need to go ask your users and say, tell me about this product. What do you like about it? What do you not like about it?" And so 2 weeks later, that had been done. And what we found out was none of the business people liked the product. Like, they didn't like it. It checked all the technical components, but it did not check what the business actually needed it to do, which was a big aha moment. And so my aha moment yesterday in the classroom was, I'm expecting people to come, my students, to come to my office hours, send me an email, send me a message in our learning management system. I'm expecting them to come to me. I have really great I have a great class. I mean, all my students are fabulous. But what I haven't done is like made it easy for them. Like, I need to do some kind of other collection. And I think as managers, we often think, I'm going to do what's easy for me to get information from my employees or my coworkers. But I don't think we always stop and think, how is the easiest way, the low friction way for somebody to give me feedback? So that was my aha moment. That was a very long answer. It's probably longer than you wanted, but there, communication.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And I love the way you talked about it, specifically about your students, because I remember being a college student not that too long ago, maybe. But I was at University of Tennessee, Knoxville. It was a big school. And so getting that face-to-face time with professors was really intimidating because you're in classes of 150 people. And so trying to like, I don't deserve time with this person. And so it is tough. Like it almost, you feel that inadequacy of like having to go and talk to someone who's much higher up than you, but meeting them where they are, like you're saying, seems really, really cool.
Yeah.
So no, I appreciate that.
Oh, sorry. I was a first gen college student, and I went to Austin P, and my classes weren't as big as yours, but I don't think I would have ever thought to have met with a professor. Like it just didn't, because nobody said to me, have you met with your professor? And I remember the only professor that I met with on a regular basis, there were two actually. One was an English teacher that I think just, I don't know, maybe her heart went out to me because maybe she was a first gen college student. I don't know. I met with her a couple of times and she gave me some good advice. And I remember her being very kind to me. And the other one was a calculus professor. And I just met with him because I thought, I'm going to fail this class if he doesn't explain all this information to me. So those were the two classes. And I had a lot of teachers. Like that was crazy that I only met with those two. I did something at the beginning of this semester that I've not done before. And I've said, all right, if you're a first gen college student, I want to meet with you. You don't have to meet with you, but I would love to buy you a cup of coffee. I would just love to get to know you better, and open that door. And I had a good number of students take me up on that, which I think is, yeah, it was kind of, I didn't mean to cut you off earlier, Anna.
Oh, no problem. I was just going to say about, kind of the flip side of encouraging those who maybe don't want to meet with you. And this goes for students or also management. If you didn't do that and you just announced your office hours and people could come in if they wanted to, that's not wrong. But it also, I feel like finding a way to further encourage those who, like you had set up before, they might not know they need to meet with you or that they're struggling a little bit, or they do, but they're feeling intimidated about it for whatever reason. That's probably a better way to go about it, which is also speaks to the nuance of management and how you can just sort of plow through and do things in one way, but there is so much nuance with management and communication in general. Taking the extra step to kind of be intentional, like we talked about in the beginning, that really resonates with me because I am an extrovert. I'm a over communicator a lot of time, but I also can be really pragmatic about things. And I just tend to like take the linear route, and I have to slow down and think about, all right, I can just say that this is what we're going to do. I'm a project manager here at Atiba. This is my role, but also sometimes there's more nuance to it. I should explore this from this other angle, or maybe I should meet with this person separately, or maybe I should ask some more questions instead of doing this or that. And anyway, I'm constantly challenging myself to slow down a little bit and thinking about some of these alternate paths.
Well, and I'm glad you said that because I think anytime that we're in a position of authority, we have to. Sometimes it's easy to get stuck in that loop in our brain of, well, people should just do it because I say it. And like for a professor, I have assignments and they should just do it because that's the assignment. But my goal for my students isn't just to do the class and get a grade. It's so that they really get this material and really understand it. And so Monday in my leading and managing people class, I'm going to hand out a sheet of paper that says, what do you like? What do you not like? What should we stop doing? What should we start doing? Now, if they say we should stop doing homework, I'm not going to do that, because there's some value in them doing homework. But I do want to know what they like and what they don't like. Now, it also opens up, you have to be a little bit vulnerable because, because it will be anonymous and it is a sheet of paper. So there's not any email addresses tied to it. It's not a Google form. There's not having to send me anything. It's really a low friction way for them to give me feedback. Not all that feedback may be good. They may not like how I conduct the class, and I've done this before in other classes, I might find some really good things. And so I have to also check my own ego in and say, okay, this, whatever I'm doing may not work. We need to, and I might need to change the class in this way so that it's better for them. And hopefully that might stick. And 10 years when they're managing people, they might remember it and say, okay, maybe I need to stop and have a listening session with my team and say, okay, what's working? What's going well? And maybe do it in a way that, not like Joey and I, where we would just talk the whole time and say, I'm going to tell you all the things that I think are going good. And let me tell you all the things that are going bad. But in a way that also allows the introverts to really participate in the discussion too.
I love that.
Yeah. I think that kind of hits on the social awareness that you talked about earlier. And we talk about that a lot in my house. I talk about it to my kids, of just like what social awareness is, how to get better at it, how to notice when things are maybe different than what your mind may perceive, and that you've got to put yourself in other people's position a lot. And so that sounds like what you're doing. You're trying to get like, hey, let's get some feedback out of all the students that wouldn't normally speak up. So, and as much as I would love to say this is a great segue to our next topic, it's not. So we're just I'm gonna ask you just because I want to be conscious of time, but I also want to talk about these book recommendations, because we've got a couple of things up here on our show notes that I want to talk about. And I see a lot of books that I've read. In fact, now I see Crucial Conversations on there, but I also see a lot of books that I've never heard of before. So I guess, like, to start the topic, you said you read, what was it, 60 books a year?
Yeah. I read, between 50 and 60. I set a goal this year to read 60, and I'm gonna well achieve it.
And see, to me, that blows me away, like that much reading. But talk to me about, like, I'm looking at your season 1 book recommendations from the Management Minute with Dr. Donita Brown. How do you come up with these recommendations? What are some, like, paths you can take, I guess, when you want to start on a journey like that?
Well, so the season 1 book recommendations are all from my guests. So the third question I ask is, what book has made the biggest impact on you? And that's their recommendations. And so it's interesting. In season 1, a lot of my guests gave me 2 or 3 books. They're like, I just can't give you one. Like, I have to give you more than one. I'm like, that is great. Please, please, please. And I got some of the books that you would think of, like Leadership and Self-Deception, Patrick Lencioni. I would say 1 out of 4 guests mention a Patrick Lencioni book. 21 Laws of Irrefutable Leadership by John Maxwell. That's always, he comes up frequently. There was probably half the books I'm like, yep, that's a book that I've heard of. Atomic Habits, Leaders Eat Last, Lean Startup, First Break All the Rules. What's another one that Who Moved My Cheese? I mean, some of them are just like, yep, if you've been in business for any length of time, you've probably heard these recommendations. There were a few, though, that I had not heard of. Lincoln on Leadership. Like, that's a really interesting one. Nudge, I had not heard of. And so all the recommendations from the Management Minute are ones that the guests have given. So it's really great. I will tell you, though, about season 2, the 4 Agreements was mentioned twice. And I thought, okay, so interesting. And so I read it. I had never read that book. Have y'all read the 4 Agreements? No. It's about agreements that you make with yourself. Always do work well. Always assume positive intent. And I'm gonna blank on the third and the fourth because I want to stop on the positive intent. When I read that book, I thought, wow, as a manager, always assuming positive intent is such a powerful thing. Like, if we can just always assume people are doing work for the right reasons or doing things from their best intention, that's game changing. Like that's culture changing. I read that book actually on a backpacking trip. I took my Kindle, and I love to backpack. I love to go, I don't know, a couple times a year. And one of the best parts to me about backpacking is you get to eat early, then you get to go to bed early, then you get to read for a long time. And that one, I read literally in like one sitting. I mean, it was so digestible, but it was also one that I thought, man, if I could always assume everybody had positive intent, that would that could change the world, really change the world. A couple people have mentioned Man's Search for Meaning, which Viktor Frankl, that's also a classic book. And what I have found, and it's interesting, from people that listen to the podcast, I'll have other people that will give me recommendations. I saw, no joke, my fourth grade's teacher's husband this summer, and he said, I got a book recommendation for you. I heard you liked Man's Search for Meaning. You talked about it on the podcast. A guest mentioned it. You should read The Nine, which is about 9 women that escaped from Nazi Germany. And I read it, and it's really, it's interesting now because I get book recommendations. I had a lady at church hand me 2 books the other day. She was like, I saw these books and I got them for you. I was like, oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
So do you have your own list of books that you want to read? And then on top of that, it's kind of filled in by guests on the podcast, kind of supplement your existing list?
Yes. So I have always been a voracious reader. I read a lot of fiction before I got my MBA, before I completed my MBA. And then after I completed my MBA, I realized like there's just so much out there to learn that I almost quit reading fiction completely and just started reading nonfiction. Oh, then I realized that's really probably not good for me either. Like I should probably also read some fiction. Like, there are other books besides nonfiction books. And so I joined a book club with some dear friends. And so that's almost all fiction. So they kind of tell me what books to read. And so I get to read some fiction books, but I keep a list on Goodreads of books that I want to read. I usually try to read something that's faith-based. I always have multiple books going at a time, something that's leadership or management, just so that I can, take new material into the classroom regularly. I'm usually reading a fiction book for my book club. So I'm always reading something different. I use my car time a lot too to listen.
I was going to ask you if these are all Kindle or like real books, or if you're doing audiobooks too. So it sounds like a mix of both.
All of the above. So I do Audible, I do Libby. So I listen to books in my car, read them on Kindle. That's probably my preferred way, is reading them on Kindle. I like to highlight things, and I found it's just easier to highlight them electronically. But I love marking up paper books too, and I like the real books. So I will take a book any way that I can get it.
So on the Audible books, let's say you read an Audible book, you finish it. Does that count towards your 60?
Oh, for sure. Yes. And I've had people say, well, I'm listening to it, but it doesn't count. I'm like, well, you're listening to it. I mean, I think it absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, Lee, can you clip that? I need to send it to some friends of mine that keep telling me the audiobooks don't count. So.
I heard someone say one time, especially for nonfiction books, that's what I don't listen to fiction books on audiobook, but I do a lot of nonfiction books. And even if you miss some things, it's still a great way to absorb a lot, especially, and there's only so much time in the day. So if you only count the hard books that you're reading, there's not enough time to do very much with that. So
no. And I haven't.
You heard it here first. It counts.
Yeah. I have an hour commute to work. And so oftentimes, I can listen. I don't listen the whole time because sometimes I have to make phone calls or things. But, I could probably listen to an hour and a half a day for a book.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's inspiring. Well, let's talk about our last topic here of adaptive leadership. And these were, again, just to summarize, some of the 4 topics that you had kind of circled around and have a workshop about, I think, actually, too. But on adaptive leadership, so talk to us a little bit about what adaptive leadership is and how you've maybe any experiences or knowledge that you've gleaned from your career and guests.
So I guess you could say this is really my term. So many people talk about being a servant leader, and my management class kind of laughs because if I'm asking them, a question, that they'll say servant leadership, and I say, you just think that's the answer for everything. But it's really not. Adaptive leadership is adapting the style based on the circumstances. And I do a workshop on the 9 types of leadership, but really good leaders know how to change their leadership style in the situation that they are in. And it could be for a project they're working on. It could be for a culture shift. It could be maybe they have had a leadership change and their leader has changed. And you have to change your style. One of my guests on the podcast, Manuel Calderon, from the moment I interacted with him, he was so much fun. I had gotten an email from another professor here at Lipscomb. He said, I really think you ought to interview my friend Manuel. And I said, well, that's fabulous. I would love to interview your friend Manuel. And it just so happened I was recording the Management Minute the next day. And the way that I record my podcast, because we do use shared space here at the Content Creation Studio at Lipscomb University, I typically record one day a month. And so I'll record 5 or 6 podcasts in a row in 30-minute blocks. We have just found it's easier to do it that way for our resources here at Lipscomb from a scheduling standpoint and a production standpoint. And so I got in this email and I emailed Manuel, said, I would love for you to be a guest. Just so happens I had somebody cancel. I have an opening at, let's say, 11:30 tomorrow. He emailed me right back and he said, whatever you need, I actually will be in the area. I would love to come over and I can make that work with my schedule. I thought, okay, that's great. He comes in and he says, as we're walking into the studio space, whatever you need, I'm glad to do this for you. If you ever need a guest speaker, and it was just really like the way he spoke, you could just tell, like he was just truly a servant leader. As he left, he said, really, if you want me to come and talk to your class, I'll be glad to. Well, I did not, and this is probably not something I was not a good practice, but I didn't do a lot of research on him before he came in. And after he left, I looked him up on LinkedIn. I thought, this guy's like the real deal. Like he's like a principal in this technology company. Like he's the guy, like he's the head guy. I mean, he shouldn't have had time for me, but he made time for me. And then before he left, he said, probably 3 or 4 times, whatever you need. And I thought, wow. Like he has really adapted his leadership style, probably to fit his personality, which was one thing, but also for the situation. I thought, well, how awesome would it be to work for a leader that said to you, anytime you need something, whatever you need. Like I would jump over tall buildings to work for a leader like that. I mean, that has just got to feel good. So, and then what I have learned in studying leadership and in doing that podcast is we all have a natural style of leadership and we all have an aspirational style of leadership. We may all want to be like, and I want to be like Manuel, but then we have a style that we need to use for whatever situation we are in. And that's really where the magic is learning to be adaptive.
Yeah, I love that. I want to ask you so many more questions about that. And I really like the term adaptive too, because you do hear servant leadership thrown around a lot. And that's a cool concept, that you're willing to work with and alongside your team and get what needs to be done. But
it doesn't work always. Like sometimes you have to be very bureaucratic and sometimes you have to be very autocratic. And, and that might not be your natural style, but that just might be what you have to do in that point in time.
Absolutely. Well, this has been really wonderful, Donita. Tell us a little bit about how your workshops work. I know you have launched a new one. And also, I'm not sure how you do all that you do, but given your the books that you read, the classes you teach, the podcast you host, and the workshops you provide. But tell us a little bit how those work.
Well, I will say this, the life of a college professor is pretty great. It is a little less demanding than working in IT, which I appreciate. I still have a lot of students and I still I have the best job in the whole world. But let's talk about the workshops. So the workshops, I just did a workshop for almost 200 people at HCA on revitalizing your routine. My dissertation work that I just finished in December was based on self-care and self-care in a research-based way. But I do have, maybe 12 workshops that I do. Most of them are about 90 minutes. What I have found is that's about right for adults, not in the college setting, but for working professionals, that works pretty well. I have some workshops on how to, so the self-care one, from a research-based standpoint, self-care isn't something that's just like bubble baths and nail salons. It's self-care is what do you need to remain healthy? And most of us operate in a self-care deficit, which leads to burnout, stress, and exhaustion. And for those of us that work for companies have an interest in making sure that their employees are healthy and not burned out, stressed, and exhausted. What I found in my research was there's 6 domains of life that you need to maintain normalcy of health. And so I have a workshop that kind of walks you through those 6 domains, and you create a plan to see what your normal health is in those areas and how you're feeling today if you have a self-care deficit, and then how to remediate. Followership is probably my new favorite one. So what type of follower are you? What type of followers are in your organization? And it's really crafted for people that want to become leaders, but it's how do you be a good follower first? A workshop I've done for a long time is the 9 types of leadership. And that's kind of where I come up with that adaptive term. Everybody has that normal style. Everybody has that aspirational style. But what do you really need to be today? So I'd say those are probably my 3 best workshops. I have, like I said, about 12. Always glad to talk more about those. Anybody that wanted more information could message me on LinkedIn. You can find me at Dr. Donita Brown on LinkedIn.
Is there a spot anywhere where they can go and like see your workshops, or is it best to just reach out to you?
It's probably best just to reach out. Sometimes I change them based on what is needed. I'm glad to send you my workshop list if you want to put it in the show notes.
Please, that would be great. But I love that you said like, and before we wrap up, but I have one more thing to ask you about. But I love that you just like the smile on your face. And you're like, I have the best job in the world, and it's like that is so cool to see, because it's like so many people think they have a great job, but I really believe it when you say you have the best job in the world. Like you just.
And I think I can compare it because so probably the hardest job I had was that best team I talked about. But there was a lot of break fix component in IT, and you being IT people, you understand that you don't always get to plan your day and it go the way that you want when you're working in IT. And I loved my time doing that. But I will tell you, it's pretty nice to plan my day and not know that there's not going to be a server, a network connection break. There's not going to be storage that I have to worry about. Like there's nothing that breaks in this job. It's kind of like you plan it and you do it. And then I'll have to say, we have the best students at Lipscomb. Like I just love the students here. When I was interviewing for my job here, I had taught 10 years as an adjunct at a different university. And one of the people I was interviewing with, he said, you're going to be amazed by our undergrad students. And I thought, oh, please, I am not going to be. I mean, they're undergrads. I had taught in the MBA program for 10 years. And I thought, well, okay, I'll go to Lipscomb. I'll teach an undergrad course, but that'll be like my trade-off for getting to teach in a graduate program. I got to Lipscomb and I realized we really have great students here. Like every semester, I am just so encouraged. And it might be a generational thing. These Gen Zs not being motivated by money, being motivated by purpose and doing work that is bigger than just a paycheck. It's really inspiring.
Yeah, that's so awesome. And yeah, I mean, Lipscomb's a great college. My brother graduated from there. He had a communications class with a professor named Dr. Schott, and he brought me in one day he was doing a presentation on his time as a karate instructor, and he used me as his practice dummy in the middle of their class one summer. So that was entertaining.
I bet that was entertaining.
Yeah. But before we wrap, I see a note in here about your kids. I want you to just the bluegrass. I want you to just give us that little thing, and then we'll let you go and get back to your day.
Yeah. So my daughters, and it's kind of crazy. My daughters play bluegrass music. They, unlike a crazy level, they are in a bluegrass duo called She's My Sister. You can find them on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. They've got a couple viral videos on YouTube. My youngest plays mandolin and fiddle. My oldest plays stand-up bass, dobro, and guitar. We're going this weekend. We go almost every weekend. They play somewhere. They're playing in Titus, Alabama for a bluegrass festival. Last weekend, they were in Elkton, Kentucky playing a festival, and then at the Mountain Opry in Chattanooga. So they play and a couple of different bluegrass bands, and been on TV, and we're always doing things behind the scenes and on the weekends to support their love of bluegrass music, which sounds crazy because you wouldn't think that a 13 and a 15-year-old would love bluegrass music, but my daughters, Amelia and Reagan, do. So they're part of a band called the Tri-State Ramblers, which is also on Facebook and Instagram. And then you can follow just my two at She's My Sister.
Oh my gosh, that's so neat, Donita.
Yeah, we'll have to put that in our show notes too, just
Yes.
for fun, because I think
Absolutely.
it's amazing.
Absolutely.
Proud mama. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. This was a really fun conversation.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this. Thanks for being the highlight of my week.
Yay.
That's great. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Half Geek, Half Human podcast. Make sure to follow the Half Geek, Half Human podcast on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to Half Geek, Half Human.